I have done the math, so you don't have to. The United States is broke, and it is worse, much worse than you think it is. It is so bad that Moody's has dropped our credit rating, and it was the last perfect credit score, if you will, that the United States had. But what does this mean for consumers? What does it mean for the stock market? And what does it mean for us in general? Ugh, it ain't good. Let's go ahead and break it down. There is a lot to this, but y'all asked me to break it down, and I'm going to show you the math. Good thing for you, I used to be a math teacher. I will make it simple, but as you see, I did do a lot of math here. But here's the thing, okay? We have a deficit, okay, which means we spent more money than we brought in. The good thing, at least I thought, between Doge and between the tariffs, I thought we were going to hopefully, cover some of those expenses. That ain't the case, and the math is the math. Doesn't matter what side you fall on politically. That's why I like math, because it don't matter what you think. The math is the math, okay? So here is the thing, okay? And it does affect your money, so you definitely want to see how it affects your money. First off, if you want to just get to the money side of things, the market was down 800 points because of this, okay? Because of this. So first, let's just show you what our budget is as a country right now. Let's start off with the expenses. As you see here, Social Security, 1.5 trillion. Okay, this is where all the money goes, and this was the federal budget for fiscal year, that is the financial year 2024. So Social Security, healthcare, the net interest on the debt, $880 billion, $882 billion. And then you go on down, defense, income security, veterans, so on and so forth, education, blah, blah. Okay, so that's all the stuff we spend money on. Now, the interest on the debt gets more expensive. Why is that? Because there are three, I like to call them credit rating agencies, the same way that we think of, FICO, Equifax, things like that. We have S&P, Fitch, F-I-T-C-H. I'm not great at spelling. And then Moody's. Moody's was the last one. They had us at the highest, and now we're not. Now, just like you would with a credit score, your credit score drops, you can pay a higher interest rate on your credit card, or we can pay a higher interest on that debt. When we say debt for the United States, we're talking about bond interest rates. And when bond interest rates spike, that sometimes means that the stock market falls because they have an inverse relationship. And that is what happened today. And that can impact other parts of your money, including your credit cards and including mortgage rates. So we're going to get to that. But first, let's talk about where the money came in from and why that is an even bigger problem. So on the right-hand side, you got individual income taxes. Now, we all know, honestly, I don't know anybody who enjoys paying income taxes. I don't like it, okay? 2.4 trillion is what the federal government brought in. Nobody liked the whole hiring all the IRS agents, even though I told y'all that we actually need them to make sure that everybody is supposed to be paying what they're supposed to be paying. Because if they don't, they're not bringing in enough money, and then we're going to have some issues, but whatever. Payroll taxes is a combination of what we pay when you have a 9-to-5 job and what the corporation pays by having an employee. And then you got corporation taxes, just $530 billion. Make whatever assumptions you want to make from that. And then other at $253 billion. Now, other can include a bunch of other things, including tariffs. Now, notice, that is a very small other category. Now, the gap here between what we bring in and what we spend is $1.83 trillion. That is the issue. When you have this deficit year after year after year after year, that is how you have this massive debt that we have. That is the reason why we have debt as a country. This deficit right here, year after year after year after year. Now, I've done a video on how we got here. There is a bunch of reasons, a bunch of presidents as to how we got here. There's not one single person, one single party. Okay, there are a bunch of tax cuts, there are a bunch of wars, there are a bunch of pandemics, one pandemic that got us here. Okay, that's the reason why we got here. You keep cutting your income, and you keep spending it on a bunch of stuff. Some things we needed, some things we didn't. That's how we got here. Okay, to get to the answer, that's how we got here. But how do we fix it? And are the things that we are doing to fix it, did it work? Yes or no? Let's start with Doge. That was the biggest thing that most of us would have thought, and somewhat agreed that there are some things that we can cut. Okay, so Doge, let's start there. The The argument and the thing was they were supposed to cut, and they were very loud about, hey, we're going to cut $2 trillion. That made a whole lot of sense, because if I'm looking at the deficit, 1.63 trillion, whatever that number was that we had, let me double check. 1.83 trillion is the deficit. You trying to cut 2, boom, you cut that, deficit gone, we can work it out, everything's gonna be all right. They went back and actually revised that number from 2 trillion down to 1 trillion. And based on what we have right now that we can verify and the receipts that they have only saved $160 billion. That is 16% of their new revised goal. 16%. And I don't know about you, where's Elon Musk right now? Back at his day job at Tesla. Now, for Tesla shares, that's great. For what we're talking about today, that's not great. Now, you ask me where I think he should be, that's a different question. Okay? I would prefer him to be at Tesla doing what he is well qualified to do. However, the Doge thing isn't working. Okay? Doge is not going to cut what it needs to cut, and we need to figure something else out. Okay? So, there's that. So, Doge isn't making up the difference. Well, what about the tariffs? Because that was something people were saying, all right, well, maybe it's going to bring manufacturing jobs back. I've done a video on whether or not that's going to work. But worst case scenario, what if it brings in enough money and that money offsets this deficit and at least we won't be broke again? Well, we've done the math on that. Okay, there have been several economists that have done the math and said, all right, this is what the tariffs are right now. What if we extrapolate that out for 10 years? Okay, 2.1 trillion is what it will be over 10 years. So if we divide that by 10, that gives us what? $210 billion. Okay, so for 1 year, because we're only looking at 1 year here, $210 billion for 1 year. That is not going to help us for this particular year. So we take the 1 year of tariffs plus 1 year what we have right now of Doge, that gives us how much? $370 billion. $370 billion of savings as of right now, compared to the $1.83 trillion deficit. That is not going to cut it. That is not going to cut it. But y'all, it gets worse. And here is how. We are looking to pass a tax bill. Now, the tax bill is not final. There may be some good things in this bill. There may be some bad things in this bill. I have been informed that there may be a savings thing in this bill. The reason why I am saying may is because A, has not passed. B, I don't want to jump into the bill because there's a whole bunch of stuff that can change, right? But what we do know is, as it is constructed right now, the deficit is expected to grow anywhere between $3 to $4 trillion in the next 10 years. So you're looking at a $1.8 trillion deficit today, and it is looking to grow to 3 to 4 trillion. Okay, so let's just take it at 3. So you're only cutting right now, based on what we have this year, 370 billion, and then that deficit is going to grow based on us cutting our own income even more. The math doesn't add up. You're not cutting enough, and then you're reducing your income by more than you are cutting. That math doesn't add up. Okay, that math does not add up, and that is why we get downgraded, and we may get downgraded even more in the next 10 years. So how does this make things worse for investors and even consumers? Well, let's go back to our credit score example, right? If you were loaning somebody's money and their credit score dropped, you don't want to take on that risk. And if you do, you want to be rewarded more. You want to be rewarded more, you're going to say, hey, look, I was loaning you something at 6%, the credit score dropped, now I'm going to need 8. Now I'm going to need 10%. You want a higher reward for taking on that risk. Well, your current interest rate right now is based on what the Fed is, what they're setting their rates at. Well, their rates are based on, basically what the nation's credit score is and how that is balanced. That is what this is, right? Basically, based on bond rates and things like that. So if that rate goes up and spikes like it did today, that means mortgage rates change. Credit card rates are subject to change. What you are currently paying on your credit card, and if you're looking to buy a home, that could change and get more expensive for you and get harder to buy a home. And let's say, you know, your mortgage payment was expected, as you're looking to get a home, expected to be $2,500 or $2,000. It could be $2,200, $2,300, $2,400, and that could eat up a lot more of your budget. That is the bigger concern, and that's something you may have to contend with. Get a smaller home, consider saving for longer, so on and so forth. That is the biggest issue. How do you avoid it? From a bigger issue, other than paying off your credit card and stuff like that, calling your representative and being more active, that's one thing. But other than that, on an individual level, I did put out a video on some steps you could take if the economy starts to unravel just a bit. And that's not to say this is going to unravel the economy and all those types of things. There are some steps the U.S. can take. Will they is different, but what you can do is can control your actions and how things will change if the economy continues to move in this direction, especially as tariffs start to hit shelves in the next 2 weeks or so. If you want to know what those resources and tips are, you want to check out this video right here.